Now it can be told, life can be maintained. You can go to a cave in Europe and be hooked up to this machine, which will put you in a comatose state for 50 to 100 years. Why should you be denied the advances that science will make over the next 100 years?
Beach cryogenics.
And so there's a photograph of the cave in Europe that you can go to, and I look at the photo and I'm transported to the cave. And there's a central machine piping, pumping, whatever it takes to keep the figures alive that are on slabs in the cave covered by a white sheet hooked up to the machine. And I remember waking up groaning from unimaginable depths. How horrible, how horrible. And that, you know, it just has haunted me ever since. I don't think of it very often, but it struck me as the most powerful nightmare I've ever had. And I've never been quite clear about what it meant, except the whole notion of science holding out improved. I mean, look at where we're at now, 50 years later, as far as Kurzweil, is that his name? And the Kurzweil, the singularity, and the fact we're going to be able to live forever and all that stuff.
And merge with our machines.
Yeah, no kidding. So, on Memorial Day weekend, this friend of mine, Rolf Pixley, brought me this book. And, here's the machine. And I got to do a little bit of a leap, because it's not hooked up to anything except these odd things. But when I saw it, I thought, that's my machine. And then where are the people that are supposed to be? Well, that's not the point. This machine was constructed or designed by someone who was insane and was institutionalized in Bedlam for his insanity. But he was a very interesting artist as far as being able to draw this machine. This version of it, it was never constructed, and some artist recently built this from the drawings of the schizophrenic. The schizophrenic lived at the turn of the last century. He thought that there were agents that were associated with this machine who had forced him to come under their influence, and they were sending messages from the machine to him. He has a really interesting drawing about how there's a figure at the machine as though manipulating through it, and some other figures kind of on the ground or whatever. So this comes a little closer as far as my nightmare was concerned. He also had a nightmare that prompted this illustration from the nightmare. So that's a coincidence. And then this depiction of the machine just got it to me. I just glanced at the cover of the book and I thought, that's it. And I think it was strictly a coincidence that my friend brought it to me. I can't remember my telling him about the nightmare. And so what this then goes on to discuss is how we are all probably something more or less, let's put a figure on it, 80% schizophrenic. We are so far on the way to this mechanization of our psyches and this materialization of our souls that it's not going to be long before we are completely influenced and controlled by machines in the technological age ahead of us.
And most people are
Already.
Televisions.
Texting is exactly an example of, of being taken up by a technological device that now completely consumes my daughter's day. I mean, I can't get over it that we went to one of the finest restaurants in New York when we were there in November, Cafe Bolude, and we're having, one of the greatest meals of our life, and she keeps looking down, at her knee or whatever, to the side of the table. And finally I go, what are you doing? She was texting all through the meal. I got mad. I said, come on, what is with you? And it's all banalities, like, what are you doing? Oh, we're at a restaurant. Well, what are you having to eat? Well, I don't think anything significant gets text. It's all just phrases and, impressions of what's happening at the time.
Did you see Frankenstein?
No.
Yes.
Now the current one?
The current one, yes.
Well, that's the metaphor for this. And they bring up Frankenstein in this.
The British National Theatre's thing, and I think they're doing it, what, next weekend also? With a different, they had two actors. In one set, the one actor plays the monster, and the other set, the other actor.
And is it Mary Shelley's version?
It's based on it.
Based
but
on,
it's-
okay.
Yeah.
But it was,
Yeah.
but it was again, it was that, what does it mean to be human?
Yeah.
In a mechanistic world.
Yeah.
It's a dialogue between the creature and
Oh,
the
no
God.
kidding. Well, there it
The whole
is.
thing is, that's all,
And
it's
you
an
get the
argument.
same version in Jewish lore with the golem, who is a machine figure or some kind of synthetic figure. And the sum total moral of the course I just finished teaching at the university was the last session where I asked the students if the word soul meant anything to them, even after I'd made a lot about it, that the whole course was in a way to say that the rational self-consciousness is one way to talk about the soul as a centered self, but that it's more than that, as this region here, which is, I like to associate with the thymus gland, and it's the Greek word thumos, which means vitality or spirit or soul. And it's this area. And I've gone into that at length. But at the last session I said, did the word soul mean anything to them? And then, if necessary, I'd go on to ask, does the word spirit mean anything to you? And they all said no.
Everyone.
Huh?
All of them?
Not a one.
Then I mentioned it to the guy that was kind of my student helper, Alex. I brought this up. And I said, everybody went like this. He said, no, I didn't. He said, I didn't move my head at all. Okay. That's good. Neither yes nor no.
Yeah, well, you have to adjust the dials a little bit.
And so then the one guy I wanted to grab, and I didn't get a chance to, but it happened that he came over to my house Thursday night. He was the greatest symptomatic expression of the fact that we moved almost totally to a virtual reality. And we've talked about that at length here. And we don't know what reality is anymore because it's virtual. And the blur between what's real and what isn't is almost dissolved thanks to virtual reality. And the expression symptomatically in young people's language is like, where they say like the way we used to say like this, like that. And this one student said like at least 3 or 4 times in every sentence. So it was a like, and so I was able to grab him at my house Thursday night, and I said, I wanted to tell you, please delete like from your vocabulary, to try to beat this notion that everything is virtual. And so he tried. I couldn't catch him the rest of the night saying like. And then he actually said, I'll do the thymus thumb in order to overcome saying like all the time.
I would contend that the virtual reality that we're creating today is not a new idea. I mean, if you think about religion, the people
It's so
live
platonic.
they live in
I mean,
an
it's just-
artificial reality
yeah.
completely.
It's at
Which is not-
the absolute center of Platonism, and it's the parable of the cave. And I had to even think, I set this question to them as their exam question. How does the parable of the cave relate to you today in terms of virtual reality? And here they are sitting in a cave chained, and they're looking at shadows of images of reality. So it's 2 removes. And it's almost like describing people watching television. Really, it's the television culture. And
Or the political spin that we give on things.
yeah.
Or the religious.
What is heirloom? What is?
Well, it's a pun. I don't know. He was nuts. So
Spin
instead of the word heirloom, he went heirloom. And there were these French gangs that had come to England to take control of him and other figures in England to try to foment a war between England and France, which became the Napoleonic War. So he was wacko. And but anyhow, it led to this. And the whole commentary is how he was a prophet in his schizophrenic victimage for anticipating what's happening to all of us now. And the commentary is right to the point as far as the extent to which virtual reality is taken over. There's this famous French theoretician who died just a few years ago named Beauregard, who wrote just on that. Simulacrum is one of his books. But it's all about simulation, virtual, artificial, synthetic. The Germans have the word ersatz, and how this is a complex now that is a way of expressing the forces that we are under. You know, and then even worse than that, than Plato's cave, which has a direct bearing on the Homeric consciousness, because Plato is a great enemy of Plato, and the Homeric consciousness, which was a trance state, and thinking that images of reality were real. I mean, when you hear about all the stuff in the Homeric poems, those are patterns for you to imitate. And the gods are forces that you have no control over, that invade you and make you do what you do. So you have recourse to talking about how the god made you do it. And so I thought, well, have the students today returned to a kind of Homeric mentality, where because they don't have a sense of any personal center, that is a moral and deciding center for which you take responsibility for what you do?
Bingo.
Yeah.
What about like the word samsara and maya come to mind here? They say the same thing. This is the illusionary reality, not the real reality, and the idea in spiritual traditions is to get cut through that and to get back into reality.
Right.
Now there are newer, easier ways to hypnotize and brainwash people, though.
Yeah. It's interesting that this guy also reproduced the experiments of Milgram. He built this machine.
I think his point's really good because we're getting more sophisticated in those brainwashing technologies that they did in stuff that they did 100 years ago is nowhere near what the televisions can do or
But look at the current.
our programming or education system does.
How could we have not passed the tobacco tax?
Not have what?
Passed the recent tobacco tax. I mean, it did fail, didn't it?
I did it. I haven't heard yet.
I haven't heard the actual
They're
results.
still voting. They're still counting.
It failed?
It failed.
Oh, it did?
So the tobacco,
It did fail.
the tobacco concerns put how many millions into it?
50.
50, 60.
I mean, so they bought the election on their own tax to defeat it. And the same with the governor in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Now, do you think it's conceivable that Romney would pick him as his running mate?
Well, I hope so myself.
Yeah, me too.
That's one way of getting him out of the governorship.
Yeah, exactly.
He would be doing nothing if he was sitting
Please,
in
I mean,
Washington.
do it. But I mean, that dawned on me the moment he won. I thought, oh my God, he's probably now a candidate for VP.
Or president in 2016.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh.
it's amazing, you know, you do,
Jeff
what,
would
he
sound
didn't really
pretty
do
interesting.
that much, he just had a lot of money behind him, but all of a sudden he gets, you know, tapped to be a star, you know, what the fuck made him a star? You
Just
know?
like just like Palin.
Yeah,
Well, he actually went
I'm
the
hoping we
distance
can
with what he
resist
believes.
the left turn into contemporary politics, because that's usually where we get off the subject at Penn University.
Okay, but
So
so
I want to stick. I want to
stick
stick
to
with this.
virtual.
You
Go
know,
ahead. Stick.
It's kind of, it always seems to me that things look one way when you're standing in one spot. And they look different if you're standing in a different place. And that the scientific process works for some things, but it doesn't deal with some of the more human parts of life, which is the death of a child, the death of somebody you
they've
love.
been totally excluded.
That it's, you know, the things that can crush us and break us, or can bring us to a stronger place.
Yeah.
Science doesn't do a whole lot for that, other than giving some anesthetic.
I would say we're just on the boundaries of that, because once we recognize that the death of a child is only a thought, and then we have, which is a
Hey, come
electrochemical
on, you can't get away with
traveling
that.
along the neurons.
Have you ever had it?
Wait, let me finish.
Have you ever had a
Let me
child that
finish.
died?
Let me finish. Don't be so knee-jerk reactionary.
Oh.
We have a thought, and then we have a conditioned response to that thought. A habitual conditioned response, a contraction or expansion. And then when we can retrain ourselves around those habitual thoughts to create the kind of experience we want, which is usually a relaxation, which is what we call positive, then we no longer have those negative experiences. We can get into the drama of loss of child or tsunami or whatever it happens to be, and we can feel the richness of that thing, but we can also recognize this is just a thought. We can transcend this. We don't
Okay.
need to be trapped
But
in
you,
it.
you don't realize
Science
how
is
silly
already-
you sound?
Huh?
Most
You don't
parents
realize
love
how
the
silly you
child.
sound about responding to the death of a child?
No, not
And
at
you don't-
all.
what do you got against the grief reaction?
I don't. I think it's a wonderful experience. I love that experience. I do it always. But I don't like to see people, or myself, trapped in that. And I see people all over
You
the
got a
place
point.
trapped in that misery. So the truth is what sets them free from that. And by understanding what's really going on, they say, okay, I can do this for a while, but I don't have to stay there for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Okay,
That's reality. And that's science
but
tells
it
us.
That's a
sounds like
point,
you're
that's a
saying
point.
that you don't even have the grief reaction at all.
No.
As soon as it happens, you say, oh, I don't have to feel any grief. This is just a thought. Therefore, I don't have to do that. Because
Condition.
you've said this before, where you said, this is just a thought. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, yes, you can say that to anything,
just
but
said,
that
Jimmy.
doesn't dismiss the
What about-
power of the thought, as if by simply saying it's a thought, you dismiss the power of it. You eliminate its power. Because, oh, now it's just a thought, therefore it doesn't have to have a reaction on me. And therefore it won't, because I just said it was a thought. As if it's that simple.
No, but-
Simply calling it a thought means it won't have a reaction on
but
me.
let him off the hook and take him to
In this
the
case-
point that we just had a friend tell me that a friend of his came from New York where her son had died suddenly at 25, just I guess had a heart attack and died. And that happened about 3 years ago, and she can't get over it. So she's an interesting candidate for what you say about someone who may suffer the rest of her life because she can't deal with the fact that her son died like that.
I look at my family, the same thing. I
Yeah.
look at all the people I meet, they're carrying around what we call baggage that is destroying the quality of their
Yeah.
life. And all they have, I mean, I don't deny that they should have, if they break up a relationship or a divorce, that they shouldn't have some feeling with that or
No,
lose
no,
a
no.
child, which I have know people who have just lost
They
children too.
become permanently despondent.
And that's a good thing to feel, because the sadness is only there because you care, and caring is an aspect of love,
Right.
and you want
That's
to feel
what
that.
works.
That's great.
Okay,
That's what you want to feel.
so Terry, can you read the quote from Descartes? I mean, from Galileo.
Yes.
Read that right now. I
Well,
just
better
want.
yet, it's your handwriting, so let's have your reading. I'm
Okay,
returning
well,
the,
so,
I made
you know,
copies.
we're picking up on the theme of
There you go. You
virtual
got both of them.
and
Both of them there.
synthetic and so on. I've driven home the notion that the whole issue turns with Descartes, who mathematizes everything and eliminates the human quotient from scientific endeavor. The scientist becomes a mathematical thinking machine. A mathematical computer, a mathematical, yeah. And that's physics for Galileo. And here's one of the great quotes that he has about shape, number, and motion. Quote, if the ears, tongue, and nose were removed, shape, number, and motion would remain. But there would be no odors, tastes, or sounds which, apart from living beings, I believe to be nothing but names.
So I always, when you mention Galileo, I always mention Descartes, who did roughly
Comes
the
right on his
same.
heels.
Yeah, who
Yeah.
did roughly the same thing with mathematizing.
Right.
Only that he referred to it as, I'm trying to remember now, mass, speed,
Yeah, all that.
and.
What was quantifiable and
Yes,
mathematizable.
those things that are quantifiable.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's they're digitizable.
Yeah,
So, and,
right.
It's interesting because today Apple Computer had their, this enormous festival and event that they conducted in San Francisco, in which they revealed now new machines and new possibilities. So the whole new load of technology that was effectively, laid open for a new public. And I think with that comes a sense of what I like to refer to as technological arrogance. That notion that, just like in your dream,
Yeah.
it's probably a good idea to suspend your life for 50 years, because when you come back 50 years later, there will be so many vast improvements.
And your VW will still start,
Right,
like in Woody Allen's dream, right?
right.
I have
There was
a
a version of what we're talking about.
But not
question.
only that, but you'll have one that runs on a hydrogen fuel cell.
Yeah, right, the boot.
I have a question on digital cameras. Do they record instants, or is it sort of continuous? I mean, I don't understand, because the old cameras took frames,
They do, they still
Yeah.
do frames.
so they still do a frame.
Yeah, still
So
three
they
frames a
compile
minute.
it for a certain
30 frames a
instant,
second.
and then they go into the next one,
Yeah.
or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Because that's a very
Very
interesting question in physics now, when they're talking about reality, and taking time altogether out from unifying the
Field.
the fields, and so the theory is, many physicists now believe that there is something to it, that the whole universe is a series of instants. It's like frames, and so there is, that makes it almost infinite number of frames available, and nobody dies, right? This is Julian Bordur, the physicist. I was showing you the article,
Yeah.
but you didn't pay any attention, because I thought
tried, I
that you
tried.
would be happy that you are immortal now.
Well, you know, when you talk about photography, it's a great example of, I have a good time to put your camera asleep and go into suspension, because we're on the verge of some major changes in photography.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So the first one,
But you won't be there.
I mean, it's a little like dreaming alone. So the first one is already here, it's high dynamic range, and it allows you to take a photograph that when things are in the shade, it brings them into the light, and when things have light behind them, and so they get sketchy along the edges, it reduces that. And this is all done digitally. Now they're actually saying that you can have as many focal points in an image as you want. So with standard
Yeah.
lenses, there's always only one thing that's in focus.
Right.
If it's a face, then the background is out of focus, etc. Now you can establish however many points you
Infinite
want.
depth of field, yeah.
Well, so we'll get to 3D. I mean, that's a 3D issue, isn't it?
Well,
Where you bring everything into, I mean, I have
yeah,
yeah?
I mean, it's,
High definition is on the way to that, and I marvel sometimes just at looking at the crowd at a basketball game. You can almost make out everybody's face because it's so high definition. And 3D is an amplification of that.
so what Apple is saying about this technology is that it will redefine photography. And again, it's a wonderful example of technology.
So if it's built-in obsolescence, then, you know, I still remember the day that Bernie LeBoeuf came over and said, "Hey, you got to come and see and listen to my CD player,
Right.
and once you do, you'll never play any of your records again." And I'll add 500 records. What is he talking about? I never did. And I still got the records, but I never played them.
Why?
I just have them thrown away.
I have a comment about.
They're actually coming back in because
Yeah, I know.
the sound reproduction
I'm
is
hoping.
better. Yeah.
They're worth a lot today.
I have a
Yes.
comment about everything in focus. If you think about a picture in a football game where the football player is in sharp focus and the crowd in the background is out of focus,
Right.
that constitutes the art of photography. It's art by accident because lenses were incapable of producing otherwise. If you had a lens that produced everything in focus, is that desirable? Is that something we really need? I mean, I realize there are situations where you might want to have it, but where's the artistic expression? Is it something like putting it out to pasture and saying that art is no longer this situation, or is it art?
It depends on the
ability
f-stop.
To be able to use a lens and live within the confines of the physics of the lens
And
itself.
some are saying the technology makes a lot of ordinary people into artists who would otherwise be.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean,
They're not artists. They're
I
operating
think
machine.
I think the limitations define the art. A sonnet is written, it's 14 lines long, it has a set verse form, and every line is 10 syllables long with a set rhythm. All of those things are a horrendous number of limitations. And as a result of it, we've had, some masterful sonnets.
Sure.
And they're defined by that, and very much the same way in Ansel Adams can bring one thing into focus and something else out.
Aline wanted it.
Yeah, this is related. There's a new book I have yet to read it. I'm anxious to.
Are you sure it's related?
Heard him, yes. It's
Okay.
called Too Much Magic, Pulling the Plug on the Cult of Tech.
Yes.
Secrets they won't tell you about your digital life by Jason Ben-Levy.
Okay.
New book.
But the point I want to make, if we've gone through this obsolescence issue, and we're being superseded by all of these things, eventually that'll happen to us.
Well, of course, we already are.
Yeah.
How does that photo thing work? Does the photographer get to choose in the multifocal? Does the photographer choose different focal points? Or can you, as the viewer, decide, I'm going to focus on the face, now I'm going to focus on the background, and then all of a sudden you'll be able to see the background? Is that how that works?
Yes,
There's
and
nothing
then on your
Cameras
iPad,
on what it has in
you
focus.
hold up your iPad, you have the image there,
Uh-huh.
and you can then select the areas you want to
Just
be in
like you
focus.
do right now with your eye.
You touch the ones you want to be in
Focus on this
focus.
guy or that person, or
Yeah.
see the background.
Yep,
Whoa,
and they're all in focus.
that is, how did it do that?
Why not? Well, because it's not relying on just on a lens now, it's also relying on a computer program, which is,
Yeah, they probably
Yeah,
supposed to have
effectively-
a
So in
lens.
essence, it's taking 1,000 photographs at different
yeah,
focal points and storing them all
it
as a file.
is, basically, it's the same with the high dynamic range. It's
So you
really
see-
taking 3 photographs and taking the best of the 3.
What's the difference between that and high resolution?
High resolution is just the number of pixels per inch.
Yeah, but in a high resolution video or a picture, you can already go zoom in on something and see the clarity of it.
You see,
I mean,
it's,
which you couldn't see if you were focusing in on the person in the front, and the camera's focusing on the front. But a high resolution, you zoom in with your image,
Yeah.
and you can see the clearly
that's
the
right.
person
So
in the
you're-
background.
You're thinking in terms of lenses. And
I'm thinking
now-
turning pictures.
Plus, if you're
now
far
what we're
enough away,
talking
you
about
have to feel
is like, it's approximations, or if you wish,
Can
it's
can
conceptualized.
can I interject as
Yeah.
a photographer?
Yeah.
It's the photographer who makes the decision. The photographer chooses his ASA rating for the speed of the film.
Yes.
The photographer chooses the f-stop of how much is going to be in focus. He also chooses the speed at which it is taken. The lower the speed, it means that the more of a smaller an f-stop he can use, which brings more into focus. So
Yeah, but
consciously, the
this is all
photographer
digital
makes a decision.
cameras.
Pardon? With all cameras, with film,
No,
with digital.
You see,
film.
what high dynamic range is it takes 3 different f-stops. And then it makes a decision for every area in the image, which one provides you with the best image.
But then again, it's still up to the photographer as to what he's going to utilize.
That's right, and you also have the choice of not
Yes.
applying the high dynamic range, but nonetheless, it's there.
Choice
And
of all
these are simulations. You see, and it's the same thing with the focal length. Now you have multiple focal lengths. With an ordinary camera, you only have one at a time, but it can, since it does things so instantaneously, in an instant, it can have dozens of them.
Before we get too far
Uh-oh.
into photography,
Yeah.
I have an announcement to
Sir, noble treasurer.
I am, for those of you that have not heard me before, the paperless treasurer of this organization.
Virtual.
Great achievement. I always think of it when I find some story about the budget, that we managed to persevere without any record whatsoever except the church's record
And your honesty.
and my honesty. We pay, for those of you who don't know, for the use of this room, $100 a month. That breaks down very neatly to a contribution from 20 people at $5 apiece.
We have found over the years that the group, usually numbering more than 20, as indeed today we have more than 20, the group breaks very evenly into 3 equal parts, like gall. 1/3 of the group are complete
Kingdom.
deadbeats, but we love them.
No, we're cash poor.
We let them be. 1/3 of the group duly pay $5 for 4 or 5 sessions, which is the month due. The last third of the group pays what they can. So I'm going to pass the hat, and I want you to not think too much about photography until you've thought about what you can spare. Okay.
Financial dynamics.
Sir, go ahead.
I mean, I have to say, I pushed this point too far, but just to say that it is, what you've done is the virtual has now become real. And, you know, to the extent that you have the photograph. And it's a concept that has taken on a physical form.
And then the photograph used to be an object that was kept somewhere, and you could go and look at it without plugging anything in. Now, it's in the internet.
It's in
now.
the cloud.
Yeah, and so where is it? Is it anywhere? I mean, what happens to it? You know, I mean, it's those are kind of things, and then if you are too slow to understand the technology, then you're already off the wagon. You know, I mean, you're in the gutter.
I'd like to talk about high dynamic range art and Ansel Adams. Ansel Adams, of course, is the iconic symbol of photography. But actually, Ansel Adams was a darkroom sorcerer.
Yeah.
Yes.
He refined burning in and dodging to an art, and as a consequence of doing that, he redefined art, later to go on to really small apertures with incredibly sharp focus.
Yeah.
When you talk about high dynamic range, you're talking about a technique that a camera can do, where it can take, you know, where you have too much light and too little light, take 3 pictures and put them all together and subtract out of it what you don't want. You're really doing the same thing as what Ansel Adams did, except that rather than understanding it, the camera does it for you. And if you can take things that are very dark and show the detail in them, and very light, and basically take away the glare and put it all together, you can achieve an amazing picture, which is the same thing as what Ansel Adams did, except for one thing. Ansel Adams knew what he was doing. He was creating it in the spirit of art, and if your camera does it for you, and if you have no idea of what's going on, then art is lost.
You're here.
Well, the thing is that you can play with these things.
Of course.
Yeah.
And
You can, on the computer?
You can, you know, put things in shadow, you can, you can make them unclear.
Take out the telephone pole.
You can take out
The telephone pole.
No,
Well, on
yeah.
computers. I
Yeah,
mean,
That's part of the art.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I took out, when I photographed the other day, this church from across the street, and there's 2 cables that go across the church. And so I took out the cables so that the photo looked better when I published it in the online magazine.
But you did it on film?
I did it with my digital camera there,
Or did you?
and then I put Photoshop,
Yeah.
and I simply removed the cables that were obscuring and not making it as good a picture as I could make.
Just one point there, Paul, and then you're next. I was on the plains of Colorado with my friend Baker Rocha, and we were looking at telephone poles just lined up through the valley. And he said that a guy had painted that, and that he was interested in buying the painting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just telephone poles in a valley.
Sure.
But it visually it had this terrific, you know, I didn't even, until he said that, I probably wouldn't have noticed them. And all of a sudden,
Yeah.
the telephone poles became an art object.
Well, in railroad photography, we used to dream if we only had a telephone removal filter
Yeah,
that we
exactly.
could use.
Yeah.
And now we do with Photoshop.
Yeah. Okay, Paula.
Georgia O'Keeffe and Ansel Adams were the contributors to their art up at MoMA. It was quite marvelous to see the reality of Ansel Adams, the now, the preciseness, and then the variations that Georgia O'Keeffe chose to interpret what she was looking at. And this brings me to a good example of what accepting reality is about. Beauty and what we choose to interpret is the imagination that makes our life interesting.
Of course.
But the thing of it is, there is a truth to that also. I lost my husband. 4 months later, my son died. And I lived through it for the simple reason I could focus on the joy and the happiness that I shared with both of them at the time I had them. We have to stay in reality. We have to have critical thinking that doesn't allow us to get off into the fantasy. That's what reframing is, and the post-traumatic syndrome condition of military people are cured because they get to reframe and see what the reality was of that situation. I know, because the man that invented that was a psychiatrist that I lived with. And it works. And we can each do it for ourselves, given that unless you are demented, unless you do have a psychotic condition, and certainly there's a lot of that out there, but the possibility of helping the synapse of our brain get down and give a direct path to making a connection to what is real.
I'd like to go back to virtual reality. And Facebook, for instance, as an example, that we're taking what he said, what he did with the picture with the lines in there, he took that out, and we're creating virtual communities of people, and the ones that we don't want in there, we can take them out, and we can only create a very narrow definition throughout. There may only be 300 people in the whole world who could love you, so you pick those out and you weed out the ones you have, and then the few who maybe tolerate you, you keep them on, but you might limit what they tell you about. Like I had a woman that was always putting up pictures of mutilated animals because she was very pro-animal stuff, so she'd put up these pictures of mutilated animals, and I just got tired of 10 pictures in a row, so I just kind of censored her animals out there. So I was taking, in my community, in my social world, I was taking those wires out of the image that didn't make the image the way I wanted to see it. And so I think what we're doing in the virtual reality, because there's so much choice, we're creating a world that is heaven on earth, as opposed to finding, like somewhat what she's saying, like finding the beauty and reframing the world as it is. That's one of the reasons I'm staying off of Facebook, because I don't want to have that artificial world anymore. But we do that. We're doing it in everything we do in our lives. But it's harder to do it in the physical world than it is in the virtual world. And yet so many people are living in that virtual world, spend all their time in it, and television's included.
Can I just say a word about Bethlehem Hospital?
Yeah.
So, here's the illustration. At the beginning of the 19th century, the Bethlehem Hospital rose to prominence, and it became the place where they were making the most advances in psychology at the time. And in particular, with madness, it was at that time that hysteria became a woman's equivalent to melancholy, which had existed before, and they began to make a distinction between melancholy and mania. And in the Bethlehem Hospital, which was short for Bedlam, that's where the word comes from.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's a contraction of Bethlehem?
Yeah, it was shortened to Bedlam. It was sort of typical English conjunction. there were other painters and artists who became very, very famous, and amongst them Richard Dadd, who appropriately had murdered his father. His name was Dadd, and left a very considerable variety of paintings. But Jasper Rose used to love these paintings.
Well known.
Anyhow, this was also the time that people became fascinated with mental aberrations, and they started popping up in the literature in Gothic novels, including a very famous Gothic novelist, Joanna Bailey, who was the brother of the head of Bethlehem Hospital, and Thomas Lovell Beddoes, who was a doctor, and of course Horace Walpole and others. And they began to provide us a literature which, amongst other things, had numerous demented people in them. So there was a sort of tremendous fascination with this kind of strangeness and monstrosities of the mind, which became the excesses of romantic novels. The Gothic novels with their horror stories and their demon lovers and their dungeon environments and all that sort of stuff.
I don't get horror movies and horror stuff. Why are people attracted to those other than these?
They like to get scared.
What?
It's virtual scare.
It wakes them up.
Virtual
To me,
fear.
it's the people who are the most asleep want that stuff, and they want to wake themselves up to something.
And Frankenstein was one of them.
Yeah. I've always had a hard time differentiating between normative delusion and pathological delusion. I got the normative delusion from Socrates, the confession of self-delusion. You've got to correct yourself in thinking that you know when you don't. And that's delusional if you don't do that. Because if it's not the case and you think it is, you're deluded about it. So make this check. So the Socratic check was always to be critical of the moment when he thought he knew, because that's just when he might not. So it's a kind of an epistemological methodology for relating to how you think. And then how you parse that with pathological delusions, where it doesn't seem like there's much you can do with people that are deluded in a mental illness way, because there's no check. You can't say it's not raining outside when they think it is. So, you got to treat with drugs.
In the mystical tradition, they look deeper into that same question of when you're deluding yourself, and recognize that even in this instant, if you think you know something, it's already the history that you know, so you can never know anything. And that's what mysticism is about, staying in that not knowing and the mystery of the reality and the mystery of God, the mystery of reality, because you never can know anything. Even if you think you know that it's warm in the room, but that was, by the time you know that, that's already history, and not in the present moment and not in reality anymore. It's a history. It's felt warm back then, but then it's also a psychological base, because you can make yourself feel warm in a cold situation, so you never really know. So mysticism has looked much farther into that same question.
Would you say it's static?
Pardon?
It's a static. The now is static in the sense that it's not the future or the past. So is it frozen? That's the
I would
question.
say it's dynamic in that it's not a it's always changing. You can never hold
Right,
on
but
to it.
there I come back to the frames. That it stops, and somehow we think that it's flowing, and moving, going forward
It
or
appears
backwards.
to be.
Yeah,
Yes,
it appears to be.
which
Right,
is one of the
right.
things those physicists,
Yeah,
I read
yeah,
that thing
yeah,
too,
yeah.
because what we have in the video is just frame,
Right.
and that makes it, and to us, that appears as if motion.
Right. And the film, especially the old film, when you think about it, it was really, it was just frames that were almost identical. And they are
Yeah.
at a certain
Slight
frequency,
little change.
and it looks real.
And it gives us the appearance of time.
Right.
So if we want to be in the honest place, which we were saying Socrates was it Socrates you said, was saying that is to be truly into the truth, we recognize we can never really know anything, and hence the mystic is the one who's the healthiest of mind when they
But
admit
then art and all those things, literature, we sort of we can live in the past. I mean, we even create this illusion, or in the future, if you were into science fiction or something.
And that's the point that I see a lot of people like in the non-dualist culture. They're so much into that reality, sticking with the truth, but they miss the richness that comes with the delusion. We go to movies for the delusion because it gives us richness. We like that. It adds the quality of life. If you just had the reality all the time, that's death. It's boring. It's miserable. It's the art. It's the playing of the illusion. So getting into the illusion, fully into the drama of, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? It's totally illusional, but
even if you
rich.
know that it's fiction.
It's rich. And you want to have that stuff.
Escape to the movies.
Or mine.
That was their marketing slogan.
So where we go now?
Beats me.
Can we go back to the
Jim.
grief issue?
Huh?
Can we go back to the grief issue?
Grief, oh,
Yeah.
sure.
I've had a really good, rich life experience with it. And one of the things that I know is that the point when I intellectualize it and push it away are the places where I get stuck. The point where I embrace it and realize that what I am trying to hang on to is the part of me that loved that person, that cherished that person. And that, I think there's a line from a Robert Bly poem that it was the fear of going down, it's the fear of going into the dark places that keeps us stuck. And that for a lot of people, that it's in that spiritual realm, outside of the scientific realm, that it isn't E equals MC squared or some mathematical equation, is where they gain the courage to go and do that. It's the soft places, it's the things that, my sister's a mathematician, and she said we divided the world down the middle. She got all the things that had precise answers, and I got the rest of the world. In terms of understanding things, and between us, we did a pretty good job of coming to informed decisions. And I think it's just something to think about, that it's not just a thought, because grief for most people is a very physiological experience. It isn't just a thought.
It's a physical reaction to the thought.
It's outside of thought. It's outside of anything that's reasonable.
Well, that's where the consciousness raising movement. I did the same thing with sadness. I says, I kept going into it, and I go, why is this so painful? It's because because the only reason I felt sadness is because I cared. And caring being that aspect of love. And that's what keeps taking me. So when I see sadness out there, I like the experience of love. So I go into it. I like feeling caring, and I get passionate about things and go into, because that's a rich feeling, and it adds to the quality of life. It gives me vitality, gives me motivation for keep going. And that, by the way, though, is the only way I could get there was by watching myself. It was something that Jesus taught to do. Just sit there and watch, which is what meditation is. You sit there and watch what's really going on. That I had a thought of some image out there, and then I had a reaction to that thought, and that's the one that gives me the quality of the experience. And that's what I recognized, well, I don't want to have a fear-based reaction. I'm not attracted to those experiences. But I do want the ones that are love-based realities. So I can choose that.
And that's the kind of reality that you're not going to get in the world of Hall students, is that if it's all just about the virtual part of things, I think probably death is probably the most nitty-gritty real thing for me.
I had to make up a term to explain my grief reactions, and I think I've only had two, as far as, ones that totally overcome it. It's a paroxysm of nature. And,
Paroxysm?
paroxysm of nature.
As in peroxide type? Same?
Paroxysm, where, it's kind of like an internal cyclone. And paroxysm seemed to be the term that caught it, because you're so taken away, and this trajectory came through me, and you undergo this reaction for minutes, and then it subsides, and it's over with. But when that hits, and it's hit twice for me, that's a unique experience. And you don't even know, you can't figure it out, what it is that blows through you with such force.
When you feel it, you feel.
Yeah, and just takes you away. I mean, when I heard that Chadwick had died, that was, I think, the first one. And I was on the telephone to Baker Roshi, and he said, "Oh, Alan is kneeling next to his bed, and he has a image of the Madonna and child on the bed and Shakespeare's 15th sonnet." And so, wait a minute, I'll go and check. And he went back, and he said, "Alan has now died. He's fallen over." And I put the phone down, and I ran out of the house. I mean, I was propelled. It's like something got in me to run me out of the house, because I didn't want to run out of the house. And I got to the front yard, and then I had the impression that a skyhook could actually come down and pick me up and lifted me up in a big somersault, and I wound up on my feet. And then I turned around and ran back into the house and sort of did a dive into the bed until this paroxysm of nature had gone through me and subsided and was over. So that was a peculiar experience.
I can actually kind of relate. I've had a couple of those experiences too, where you're no longer in control. There's something else is taking you over.
Yeah, it just takes you away.
And it's such a strong emotional reaction that the overdoing of data coming in, the brain just kind of does these weird things and explodes, kind of like.
Yeah, and the
something takes
nightmare I
over.
had about this was like that. I mean, that was a kind of paroxysm of nature in a nightmare, that in a morning sense, because I woke up mourning what I had dreamt, and it was anticipation of, how 50 years from now, you've waited out the advances of science, and now it's totally taken control of you.
Would you say what you're describing is something like what Paul experienced on the...
Well, that's a good one.
Something like the what?
When Paul got knocked off his horse?
Yeah.
So now you could almost call them cataleptic revelatory experiences. So here's Paul, who as Saul was the persecutor of the early Christians, and one of the foremost Pharisees in his persecution mode, and he gets knocked off his horse and is blinded for 3 days. And the message that comes through him as he's knocked off is Jesus saying, "Paul, why are you kicking against the pricks?" Which I always thought was kind of funny.
Yeah.
And anyhow, so now you've got these issues of great revelatory moments that people give expression to that are examples of this paroxysm, where they're taken away. They've gone through a kind of frenzy or mania, and they come back transformed by virtue of what they received. So he's a good example of it.
That's what you could call a satori or enlightenment experience too.
Yeah, and
You go
there's
through something.
attestations to that all through history. Socrates was known to go into trance states. On the way into the symposium, he stops on the porch and he's just taken away, and the guy he's with has to go in and say, I wasn't invited, but Socrates invited me, but now he's in a trance state on the porch, and he'll come in when he comes down.
But, all this technology, one of the things that I notice is there's very, very little time for that inner reflective time. For kids, for any of us. I mean, it's such an assault of phones and emails and information and,
Yeah, you're constantly taken up.
yeah,
Yeah.
and.
And TV. I mean, the amount of time you spend there is totally consuming.
There's a movement out there that I saw reflected on Facebook of people saying taking Facebook or technology vacations, or you do it for a day for sure. You
Yeah,
don't
get
like
some relief.
Sunday, which are the
Go
Sabbath.
canoeing, go
you do a
canoeing.
Sabbath from technology of any sort. You don't even books, which is a technology. You do a Sabbath from all technologies. Every 20, from sunset to sunrise or sunset the next day. You don't touch anything with technology, including a book. And TVs, no nothing. And that's starting to get a lot of movement. That's kind of, it's cool. I mean, how many people can do that? I read a story recently about people who went down the Grand Canyon and they couldn't take their phones. And they were like, they did this whole thing to see what the effect was on the people. And how this felt like, oh my God, it was like their umbilical cord had been cut.
See,
And
I
they just
had a friend who
didn't
did
know what to do.
I had a friend who did the opposite, Ted Carpenter, who was an anthropologist, and he took transistor radios to Stone Age New Guineans to see what their response was to a transistor. And same with cameras. If they take Polaroid cameras, they'll give you an instant photo.
Yeah.
And how the Stone Age people dealt with looking at their own image. And there's film on that, watching this
Did
happen.
you see the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy?
Yeah.
Which is basically, all they took was a hard object, just a Coke bottle, and see how it affected these people. It's
Yeah.
like,
Well, how did they react to transistor radios and Polaroid pictures?
Well, you got to watch it to see their reaction. I can't describe it, but he was a colleague of Marshall McLuhan at Toronto, so he was real interested in emerging technologies and so on, and he was the total sidekick of Marshall. But as an anthropologist, he was interested in what media would do to Stone Age societies like New Guinea. And I can lend you the CD that shows you is doing that in New Guinea. And I suppose there still are Stone Age peoples. I mean, they must still be intact in New Guinea, right?
I thought we called them Republicans.
Yeah, really. So I had another guy, Bob Gardner, was a major figure at Harvard. He was an ethnographical filmmaker. And he went to New Guinea and did a film called Dead Birds, which was on New Guinea tribal society. And it was so close to Homer, I had to, I was boggled by my mind because they're always fighting one another. You have all these tribal things, and they're mostly games. I mean, they half pretend to want to kill somebody, but they don't really want to, and they have all kinds of rituals for avoiding death. And then finally, when that starts to wear out, then they actually have a night raid where they actually kill somebody, and then that gets the thing going again. It's an absolutely amazing film. One of the great films ever made.
I have some questions about things that we just raised.
Sir,
Okay, what was Shakespeare's 15th sonnet?
when I consider everything that grows, is how it starts.
Manuel?
Want me to look it up?
Yeah.
Sure.
I can't tell you his first song. What? What makes you think I know?
We're talking about our dependency on technology.
Oh, am I going to disappoint you if you thought I knew that up here?
When I consider everything that grows, holes in its I've never memorized it, which I should, because it's such an amazing sonnet. And it was perfect for Chadwick.
Yeah.
And
It was his life.
I put it in my book. Huh?
It was his life.
Yeah. I graft you new is the last line. Last words.
When I consider everything that grows, okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, I write for an online magazine,
Yeah,
and I was doing a thing on the Friday evening event
coming up.
coming up.
Yeah?
And so I had the text there, and then I thought, I write for an online magazine. I'm not limited. So I went on YouTube, and I found a hour-long video on you,
Yeah.
and then I found a video of Amy singing,
No
and I
kidding.
put both of them up with the article so that people would know what we were talking about.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, it is.
And what's the magazine? I never heard of it.
It's called Examiner.com
And where do you get it?
on the internet.
Oh, it's an internet magazine.
That's,
It is.
internet's a computer stuff.
Yeah, I got it. So there's no print version of it.
There is no print version unless you print it out.
And how many readers do you have?
Well, so far this year, and it's only a little bit into June, I've had 13,000 hits on it.
Huh. But you can't tell if they've read it.
I have no idea.
Yeah,
But they came.
But then again, if I sell newspapers, I have no idea if anybody reads the newspapers.
true.
Or books. They might just put it on the shelf. Say,
That's
hey,
right.
I've got a nice
They
book."
just might.
But I get emails from people all the time saying
Okay.
that the article made them think. I did an article on one time on the concept of original sin,
Yeah, I like that.
and I called it, "Are you guilty for something your grandmother did?"
Yeah.
And
It's
so I walked
hereditary.
in the church the next morning, and I figured they would be throwing rocks at me. And instead, people
Nobody
came running
cares
up.
that much.
No, people came running up to give me a big hug and say how much they enjoyed it and how it made them think.
Good.
Wow.
Yeah,
So are you exclusive? I mean, you're the only one that does it?
No, they,
No,
it's
staff?
it's a big magazine.
it's a big magazine.
Oh, really?
There's
like-
writers all over the country.
You know,
Did you start
Huffington
it?
Post.
No, it's out of
Not
Denver.
quite as big as Huffington Post, but it's big. I've
Oh,
been
okay,
there.
okay.
So, first of all, let me say, I can't believe that you even knew the first line of the sonnet. That's, you know, if you knew it all, that would be
Manuel, I at
amazing.
least had to have that for you.
Well, that's still, I mean, so anyways, here it is. When I consider everything that grows, holds in perfection but a little moment, that this huge stage presenteth not but shows, whereon the stars in secret influence comment. When I perceive that men as plants increase, cheered and checked even by the selfsame sky, vaunt in their youthful sap, at height decrease, and wear their brave state out of memory. Then the conceit of this inconstant stay sets you most rich in youth before my sight, where wasteful time debateth with decay, to change your day of youth to sullied night. And all in war with time for love of you, as he takes from you, I engraft you new. I like that.
And
Vaunt
where,
in their
and where
youthful
your
sap.
brave state out of memory. I mean, that is one of the greatest poetic lines I know.
He had a way with words. I wonder who his English teacher was.
Vaunt in their youthful sap.
Yeah, you gotta read that about 10 times to really have
Yeah,
it
that's easy
sink in.
to
It's a,
And I was thinking that when we were talking about a sonnet before. So what you've got is 3 quatrains there, three groups of 4 lines.
yeah,
With repeated rhyme patterns and also completed thoughts in each. And then it's summed up with a couplet.
right.
That was a lot
And to think that, you know, every one of those lines is 10 syllables long in iambic pentameter. That is to say of a regular beat. And whether it's the limitations of photography or the limitations of a sonnet, it's the ability to do something within those limitations.
No kidding. So read the 2 lines again about on the stage and the stars commenting.
That this huge stage presenteth not but shows, whereon the stars in secret influence comment.
Once more.
When I consider everything that grows, holds in perfection but a little moment, that this huge stage presenteth not but shows, whereon the stars in secret influence comment.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
In physics, they would call that multi-scale physics. It covers everything from the DNA of the plant to the size of the Virgo supercluster's influence on our puny solar system.
Say that again. I mean, what with what?
Well, I had a spectacular several weeks with some computational scientists that were doing differential geometry symposiums. And in macro scale, in multi-scale physics, they look at the number of zeros on the scale. So at the micro scale, you get down to DNA in angstroms, which are like 10 to the minus 9 centimeters. But then at the big end, the influence of the heavens, the biggest structure we have identified is called the Virgo supercluster. And that's on the order of 10 to 100 100 times the size of Andromeda and Milky Way combined. So those sonnets are talking about stuff that even the world's best computational physics guys competing for this year's Nobel Prize, even they don't have the algorithms necessary to go from 10 to the 10 zeros to 10 to the minus 9 zeros, just something like that.
So how do you like that, you guys?
This is, Shakespeare does this in the sonnets too. In the 1/16th, when he refers to love as an ever.
So I'll read the paraphrase and see what we think of it, comparing it to the language.
Hey, good.
When I think that everything that grows has but a brief moment of perfection, and that the world is merely a stage upon which the stars, through their hidden influence, exert their illusions, when I observe that men grow as plants do, encouraged and nourished by the sky that holds the stars, and that they flaunt their youthful vitality, and after reaching their prime begin to decline, until their youth has passed from memory, then the thought of this short stay on earth brings you in the prime of your youth vividly before my eyes, where the destroyer time fights against decay, to change brightness of your youth to the dark night of old age. Because I love you, I declare war against time, and as he takes you from you, I renew your life in my verse. That's a pretty good paraphrase.
Yes.
I don't know who did the paraphrase. It was the first Google thing on that.
Yeah, you can paraphrase himself. All the words.
But the paraphrase for me, it's kind of hard when I'm reading it to take it in, but it's even harder when you're reading it.
Yeah.
But the paraphrase made it much easier for me to
Yes.
appreciate what he was saying.
Yeah.
Then I go back to the beauty
Exactly.
of the language.
This helps you go back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I almost can't make out
You
some
stumble
of the
on it because it is so tight and it's not exactly convoluted, but you gotta wait a while to kind of let it express itself to you.
Yeah, so to see it kind of in present day English, then go back to
Yeah.
Elizabethan English, and then what he does with the meter and the words makes me appreciate it all the more, the beauty of the language and what he's saying. I just can't get what he's saying. When I hear the sonnet, all I hear is the cadence and the musicality.
But isn't
not
it
the meaning.
amazing that Shakespeare would have written a sonnet for Chadwick?
Yes.
And it was also for you and me.
That could be because of
And for Jim and me, yeah.
Well, I was going to chime in. There's a lot of scientists that have been ignored and forgotten by history, going back to Rutherford and Faraday and the peers of Newton and so on and so forth, especially in France, where you had Pascal and
Lavoisier, they cut his head off.
oh my! I didn't. That was a Galileo type story with Lavoisier.
Yeah, the French Revolution caught him and they decapitated him.
But I was just going to continue on the physics download because there's a breakthrough in quantum spintronics that IBM Alden will probably make a big announcement on this summer. It's my bet. But the arrow of time is a constant discussion point and argued in quantum mechanics. And there's so much fire, there's so much smoke and so little fire around that debate that some other larger points have been lost, including, for example, in the very first Carlos Castaneda book, which is another fount of observations on nature and the subtle influences of anything.
We have an aficionado right over there. He's picked up on all that with dreaming and whatnot. Go ahead.
I want to get this done in 18 seconds. So the point was that besides the arrow of time, you can have bilocation in time. And so that's a basis for understanding quantum tunneling, not just at the chip level, well, at the macro level. It's possible for groups of people to be telepathically connected with quantum macrophysics, and we're just starting to, through some of Carver Mead. Carver Mead was a Caltech guy ignored by the doyens of physics, the Nobel Prize winners, but he was just as brilliant a Caltech member as anyone else. And he says that our concepts of decoding time have been decrepit, and that there's some breakthroughs with things like bilocation or things laterally traveling in time, which ties into parallel universe theory somewhat, but that's way all beyond me.
Okay, now please interpret this for me because I think you might be able to. I've had this odd intuition about the penny, which we've been doing since 1974.
Free.
Well, Cafe Pergolesi said 74.
Yeah, I want to get the matchbooks with the art on.
Anyhow, around 73, 74, that because we meet here every Monday, it's like we're meeting here all the time. And I got the sense from Plato, there's an odd line in one of the dialogues about how the dialogue that's happening is happening all the time. And then you get this weird spooky feeling that because you're reading it 2,500 years later, he's right, because you're participating in it and it does make it present. And so Plato also called time the moving image of eternity. So I've had this strange kind of peripheral or anticipatory, I don't quite know how to put my hand on it, that the penny has this dimension of eternal to it. And that's not because so many of them are boring. But
I could propose an experiment for this.
so can you get what I'm driving at?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I can the preamble on this is the Dalai Lama has a project that usually are reserved for people that enter the inner circle, but he advertises that it's open source for the go-getters. It's called Kala Chakra Tantra, and it's a system of understanding astronomy and stellar influences with, like, I guess you could call it Tibetan astronomy. So with that as a preamble, the way that we did calendars is fascinating, and I want to understand why Ophiuchus was persecuted to the point of being wrapped up under Scorpio when it's its own constellation between Scorpio and Sagittarius. So for people that are ever concerned about the days that they either celebrate or run and hide, the relation of Ophiuchus in the annual calendar is an interesting story if there's lore that's been ignored. But also the days of the week, according to the French, Friday is a Venus day, Saturday is a Saturn day, Thursday is a Jupiter day. So if we go back to that, Wednesday is Mercury, Tuesday is Mars, Monday is the moon. The moon, even the Aztecs and the Mayans and the goddesses that have been ignored, the lunar goddesses that have been suppressed by our decrepit patriarchies that stole all the white land from the red people, whatever. The Monday is a moon day. It's the orb that is really closest to Gaia. It's the one that's maybe most prominent in the mirror of our subconscious. So it's possible that things that happen on Mondays on a regular basis are most accessible to the collective unconscious. That's just riffing completely, but we could do experiments on that to see. Well,
We do it every Monday.
We do it already.
No, but it'd be fun to have
Louis,
you
is that
specify
what he
that.
said about the French?
How would we experiment on it?
Well, first we could collect historical data and see about attendance records on day of the week meetings, because it could be that some days of the week we have lousy attendance.
Wow, so you actually think that, yeah, there's an astrological connection what we're doing here on Mondays?
Well, it's Landy.
Huh?
It's Landy, L-U-N, which is Lunar Day.
I can't understand.
It's Landy, which begins with an L-U-N, which is Lunar Day.
Oh, okay.
How about a treasurer's report?
Yeah,
'Cause we gotta
Okay.
go, huh?
yeah,
So where'd you come from?
yeah.
I was born in Pequot land, where today there's a giant, the world's biggest Navy submarine base that's not in underwater in Bermuda.
Where's that?
Paulsville?
Groton, right near where Mystic Pizza was made.
Oh,
with
yeah,
Julia
right.
Roberts before
Yeah.
she made that totally hot fine movie with Richard Gere. Pretty
I don't know,
long.
what city is that?
So
Groton is New Haven.
what do you do here in Santa Cruz?
I recuperate from dealing with the morons at Stanford that try to persecute people that want to celebrate the Stanford's charter, which I think is the best public service charter in the world, but they have so much politics and infighting and backstabbing, even worse than University of Chicago's law school, that it's terrible.
Okay.
Bruce wants a report. We
Sir.
collected $85. Those of you that feel you'd like to contribute but haven't been walking around with money in your pocket are free to make a contribution next Monday.
We will do that. I didn't bring any money tonight because I didn't know you were going to hit us up, so I'll bring it next Monday.
I'd like to make an announcement before we close.
Yeah.
All right, I might as well do it now. In 18 seconds or less, I've been a volunteer firefighter with the Cal Fire on the Ridge. I had one really good training day with them. We've got some inventions already and prototypes for smartphone apps. There was a story in the weekly that Bonnie Doon Fire Department is way understaffed and under-equipped compared to the Ridge. I just need a little bit of help to get a round trip bus ticket up there and just enough water so I can hang for a couple of days and write a story about it. And I can report back way before Monday.
So Peg is willing to help with the fire?
A fiver is really all I need.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I was just volunteering you for the fire department, but
Oh, well, more the merrier.
you look great as a fire person.
Bonnie just got an airport. Not many people know that either.
Yeah,
It needs to keep it plain there.
Thanks for coming.
Right on, thank you.
Money that you aim for.
One more Monday and I'm out. I'm out here, you're left to your own devices.
Oh my gosh, that's one more Monday, huh?
Bruce will take over.
Yeah.
So what do you use
I got kind of stuck.